So yesterday, one of the pieces that I created, and something of a new set of potential poetics and poetry, I titled Notes Toward a Poetry and Poetics and/or Performance and Performativity of the set which contains all of the variable relationships between word and image. And the important part in this new construction of poetics is this: the set which contains all of the variable relationships between word and image. And not only because it's a potential form of poetry or a variety of potential forms of poetizing, but because it's a potential way of thinking about reading poetry, but also reading the world. And what I wanted to do today with the idea of that set was open up a possible window into a close reading of one of my own poems, which was this poem from what I'm describing as the cutting room floor of a labyrinth of visions, and the poem is called The Emperor of anTArctica. And I had looked at that poem a bit, I believe it was yesterday. I do admit and confess to getting a little confused about when I created the work that I've created, because I do a lot of creating. So it's hard to keep track of. And often I'm involved in a number of different discourses simultaneously, and I try to bring those discourses together and have one speak to another. But often in the course of those kinds of syntheses and those kinds of collages, that I tend to forget which one was made first and which one is speaking to the next, or which is speaking to the other. So in any case, recently I did a reading of all of this, and those who've been following the work that I do will know that this is also part of the process of investigating the way that my work, the phenomenology of my work, grows out of, who I am as a subject, as a thinker, but also, my embodiment as having certain limitations and having certain abilities. So that's about the way that I think about what I do. And of course, what I think about what I do is that since the work grows out of those kinds of human constraints that we all embody and occupy, the work should be about those constraints as well. And since we're always already politicized by our identities and our positionalities in the societies that we live in, then those politicizations of who we are should also become part of the work. So part of this process is finding analogies between the way that our own bodies are politicized and the way that we can use that politicization to transcend those suppressions and limitations imposed on us in the form of elaborations that are liberating for others. I mean, that has been one of the desires of my work. So anyway, all of that is going on. All of that is up in the air. All of that is going into the work. So one of the ways that, see if I can get to the image. Okay. So one of the ways that this particular piece is working, here I'm performing what I call variation in variation here, which is part of the technology of YouTube allows you these little windows, and it's a window into the larger image that you put up on the YouTube page. And I liked the way that the reflection of this one inside the other, this kind of little micro mirror, can be used to produce art. So this, I call these, variations and variations when I perform this. But what I'm looking for is right here. All right, so in performing this and creating this construct of a kind of poetry and poetics that would relate words, to images, and think about these relationships in a variety of ways. For example, an image can be composed of words. Anyone with any rudimentary knowledge of the history of poetry in the 20th century will be aware that there's a movement called, not really a movement, but a cluster of individuals creating poetry, under this term imagism, right? And the image here, is often described as a mental image, or what the idea was that you create an image in the mind using words, which is, slightly different from a symbol, or can be different from a symbol, and certainly much different from a sign. So if I wanted to create an image of a stator, STATOR, with words, it wouldn't look like this. It would be something that I described in language, right? So to call this an imagist poem would be incorrect, but interesting, right? And so the red wheelbarrow, right, is an image, and one could imagine doing something, similar with a stator. So much depends on the curve of the stator, painted in green and lying on the tarmac, or whatever it might be. So, or it doesn't depend on it, right? I mean, so little depends on, it's still an imagistic poem. But I wanted to play with all of the different ways in which a word can be material. That is, that a word can be a series of letters that you have to see, or they can be braille, which is another way of inscribing those letters, and another kind of materiality, or it can be on a screen, instead of a page. And so any time you play with this, and then I've filtered it. So even though we don't think of these abstract filters that belong to our cell phones as material, they materialize, don't they? Because you create, using this filter, a very different, perceivable difference in the visual image than if you don't use the filter. So it is a way of materializing, even though it's all you have to do is click a button. Anyway, I imagined all of these. Let's use a metaphor. Suppose these are like boxes that you can open by clicking on them, or drawers that have, in the movie that I like this movie quite a bit. There's a movie, and I can't remember who the director is, but it's called Men Who Stare at Goats, and it's a satirical, political take on the Reagan era, and this, Star Wars idea of this psychic warrior construct that apparently is derived from sort of some sort of bizarre idea of enlisting these potential human powers in the service of military and other proto-military organizations, and it's a wonderful movie and highly recommended. But there's a moment in which the characters are asked to perform in a kind of test, and the test is, one of these psychic tests in which you have to identify an object, and these objects are kept in these little, very much like the library card architecture that we used to have when the way that you would look for a book in the library was that you went to the card catalog, and these little drawers that hold these objects have numbers, and then the tester asks the potentials what's in drawer, whatever it's labeled W17, and then the one being tested has to determine what it is. Well, imagine something similar going on with these drawers, and then these drawers would have words attached to them, right? And so Slater would be it wouldn't be a number, it would be a designation on the drawer, and then you would click on the Slater, and then you would get this image. That's my dog in the background sneezing. He's had allergies lately, I guess because we've had so much rain here, and maybe he's responding to some of the pollens and other things in the environment. So you would click on Slater and you would get this image. And if you click on it, it won't quite look like this. It'll be more defined, but I kind of am liking the way that it's looking. The figure is looking in this one. And if you would click on Slater, you would get this image. So what I want to do is to take that metaphor of that I'm deriving from Men Who Stare at Goats, and these little drawers or boxes, and instead of having numbers on them, they're labeled with words, and you open this box and you get something else. Well, in this case, the relationship between the label, the word that constitutes the label, and the image, or what will become not a visual image, but will become an idea, a set of concepts, is something like belongs to that set, which contains all of the variable relationships between word and image, and also between word and concept in this case. And so that's what I really want to explore, between word and concept or idea in history. So here, let's look at it from the point of view of a kind of meta-poetic exploration. So this is The Emperor of anTArctica for John Nash, which of course is a distraction. It's really for a lot of other things, but I'm using that figuration, and I'm using this game of charades within that figuration and all of these references to point to other things, and they relate to both kind of esoteric and non-esoteric elements of my work, up to the point that I created this poem, and now, beyond the point that I've created the poem. But I wanted to address, I don't want to open all of the boxes, but I want to open some of the boxes and see what's in them. Okay, so let's open let's partially open the black cat box and see what might be in there. All right, well, the idea of a black cat, literally, let's just say it's a black cat. So we know there's this thing about, don't let the black cat cross your path, because that's supposed to be bad luck, right? Well, in this case, it probably isn't bad luck because of my take on it. So the black cat for me is going to represent either a black panther, or a black jaguar, or some other black leopard that represents all of the things that those individual signs represent, right? So there's a political thread. If you read the Black Cat as the Black Panther, there's a kind of spirit animal thread if you read it in that way. I'm not saying that any of that cancels out the black cat crossing your path, but it inflects it. And for me, the idea of the black cat crossing your path as bad luck also relates to this Dene belief that if a coyote crosses your path, there are certain things that you have to perform, right, to make that right, because it has symbolic value. So the black cat also stands in for coyote, the trickster, and then also to talk about luck in my work. The idea of luck and chance, right, is close together. So bad luck implies that you believe in luck, and luck always, for me, relates to this idea of chance. And chance has had an important and powerful role in my construction of work over time. And it probably goes back to my reading of Hans Richter's On the Dada Artists, in which one of the important chapters was about chance and the use of chance in Dadaism, from Marcel Duchamp to others, that variously gets picked up by mid-20th century artists like Cage, like Jackson McClough, and others who work with chance operations as a way of constructing artworks. Well, here I like the way that in this game of charades, it's not even a black cat, so it's not bad luck, it's not chance. It's someone dressed as a black cat. So if someone dressed as a black cat calls one's name or crosses one's path, then is that bad luck, or something dressed as bad luck, or something else? And if you take it from the point of view of the panther, someone calling to one can be an invitation for political action, right? All right. Anyway, okay, so that's a partial opening of one box that I was playing with in the poem, and then there are some other ones. Okay, I wanna go to this one, Moses. My father, Moses holding tablets of the law. Well, it shouldn't be. Let's first address this question of what this poem is. The Emperor of anTArctica for John Nash. And then if you go to the bottom, all of these things as, right? Salad dressing on my shirt sleeves accounts for the secret agents who attend. So there's a relationship between the salad dressing on the shirt sleeves and the secret agents attending one's garden by stealth. All of the talks at Cambridge hint at a universal symmetry of world government. So it's the poem, like Nash's life, is about code, is about set theory, is about the meaning of objects that belong to one set, and how they become relevant to other sets of information and thought and memory, and how these encryptions are coded both in the world in which we live and in the languages and processes that we use to uncode them, to make meaning from them, and to define ourselves within these multiple codes. So the poem is about these codes in a certain sense, and that's why I'm talking about sets of words as relating to processes of uncoding. All right, so that having been said, I want to address this line. My father, Moses, holding tablets of the law. Well, the tablets of the law, right, in a sense, are codes, right? They're codes of behavior. And there are a lot of codes that exist in our lives. There are codes of law, quotidian, ordinary law, as well as religious law. There are codes of law that belong to specific cultures, to our nations, to all of these different circumscriptions of our positionalities within our worlds hold codes. There are also social codes for poetry, right? So when Ricardo, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, I apologize. But when Ricardo wrote me and said, "Don't use I," or your use of I betrays that you don't know about our codes in contemporary poetry, because since Arthur Rimbaud, there has been a distancing of the poetic phenomenology from this like transparent use of the lyric I. And so, I would argue that, he was misrecognizing my use of code, but nevertheless, he was enforcing a kind of code. So for me, what I was thinking of in these codes was, obviously, Nash is a writer of these codes, and as a writer of these codes, perhaps, there's an original writer of codes or a paradigmatic writer of codes, to which, his inheritance or heritage belongs. And so I thought of this figure as, Moses. And, Nash is struggling with all of these problems of social belonging and not fitting in and not getting the code, and yet being such a masterful writer of codes at the same time. And for me, of course, also because of my own personal history, Moses here stands in for Harold Cohen, obviously, because of the relationship between Moses and Aaron is the artificial intelligence that Harold created in the 1970s. So thinking about that code as well. So holding tablets of the law, right? And then playfully like thinking about that. Well, obviously Harold isn't my father, but playing with these ideas of the metaphor of the father, because in a certain way, even though I didn't take classes from him and didn't learn drawing from him, but in a very certain kind of way, he was a teacher. And he was a teacher conceptually more than he was a teacher literally. And what I mean by that is I never learned to draw, but I learned to think, right? And I learned about ideas of coding, even though I don't know anything about computers or computer code, right? So I transcribed or translated those ideas into another code, right? So these tablets of law written on stone for me were something that I had to inscribe or re-inscribe or write down or take notes with in my own dysgraphic handwriting on pieces of paper or whatever was available, And so those tablets of law were always, something that in my relationship with Harold, I questioned, and the dialogue back and forth was very playful, and so I liked referencing Aaron here with Moses, and maybe there was also something about holding as well, holding the tablets as opposed to letting them go. Like, what would that mean to hold these tablets, to hold the program, to keep it close to one as opposed to placing it somewhere else? And I guess I I wanted that to remain a question, but I wanted the question to be asked. Can, if the Moses is holding the tablets, in what sense is he holding them? Is he holding them up? Is he holding them for himself? Is he upholding them? Is he refusing, in some sense, to let them go? And so all of that material and more, belongs to this box, right? It also has to do with stone, because these tablets are made of stone, and the differences in writing on stone and writing on paper, and the differences in writing on paper and speaking. And what if one has dysgraphia and can't write? Then what would that even mean for someone with dysgraphia to carve on something on stone that's going to be riddled with mistakes and errors, right? Is it even possible to think that way? So the whole epistemological question of like the perfection of these grammatically correct tablets, one has to assume, right? Like, just like the way if you write a computer code, you don't put a bunch of errors in it on purpose. If you can't do that, like, what relationship do you have to these stone tablets, right? You have a very different sense of what these tablets are and what you can do than if you know from the outset that your writing is going to be riddled with errors. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I have this way of measuring mistakes when I do something for publication or for that belongs to law, right? Like, say I have to fill out some document that's a legal document, right? And I know that if I do it on my own, with my own hand, there's going to be errors because of my dysgraphia. But I have this system that I use, or it's not really a system, but it's a measurement tool. And I look at it and I measure how many different copies would I have to make of this thing before it would improve. So if I've made, say, in a page 12 errors, and then I will say, well, I can probably improve on that. If I attempt it 3 more times, I might be able to get it down to 3 errors. Then I'll probably do it, and I'll repeat 3 reiterations in which the errors are reduced. At that point, if I actually do get it down to 3 errors, I'll measure again. How many more times will I have to do this before I reduce the error ratio? And if it exceeds what seems reasonable to me as an amount of work compared to the amount of errors, I'll just, knowing that there are errors, I'll leave them. And you can say, well, you can always erase. Well, you can up to a point, but I've often found that the amount of erasing that I have to do will actually leave holes in the paper, right? So it'd be like carving these things in stone, and then you have to chip out what you've carved and then put it back in. And there's a point at which, if something is too messy, individuals in a professional setting, or context, will not accept it. Right? They'll reject it and say, like, this is too messy, do it again. So at that point, I would have to, do 12 or 16 more reiterations, to get below the 3 error count, right? So that's my method. So part of that law for me also represents this relationship to my dysgraphia, like, my father, Moses, holding tablets of the law. You must not make errors. You must get it right. You must follow this both grammatical and textual and letters order, right? That basically that I'm unable to do. So the holding the tablets of the law, I'm already, condemned against the law. I already fall outside of the law, and so the figure, is both playful and refers to Harold in a friendly way, but also refers to this kind of super ego that I've already I'm already guilty of falling outside of or of violating the rules because I simply can't. I simply can't do what it wants. So these ideas were in the piece, and as you know, as concepts or sets of things that I wanted to use these words in terms of codes, to point to, and so as I said, ostensibly it's for John Nash, but it's not really, right? And ostensibly, the Emperor of Antarctica is something that's merely the title of this Sylvia Nassar chapter of her book, A Beautiful Mind. But of course, there's the dogs again. They're hearing some other dog barking outside, and they want to go participate in that barking. So I'll have to end it there because I'm going to let them out. But ostensibly, this is merely a repetition of the title of that chapter, but of course it's much more. And if you open its box, you'll see what it is.